The 4th Marine Division encountered enemy action for the first time during the battle for the Japanese-held islands of Roy and Namur in the Marshalls. By late 1943, Admiral Chester Nimitz's Central Pacific campaign was gaining speed. His forces had captured the Gilbert Islands in November and now set their sights on the Marshall Islands as the next stepping stone toward Tokyo. The operation was called Flintlock. The plan had Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner's amphibious force bypass the Marshall's stronger outer defenses and instead strike directly at Kwajalein Atoll in the archipelago's center. Major General Holland M. Smith, commander of the V Amphibious Corps, chose the Army's experienced 7th Infantry Division to capture naval facilities on Kwajalein Island, while Major General Harry Schmidt's untested 4th Marine Division, sailing straight from San Diego, was assigned to seize Roy and Namur, which had an excellent airfield, located 44 miles to the north. Flat and barren, Roy measured about 1,200 by 1,250 yards, just enough to host the airfield. Connected to Roy by a 400-yard causeway and a narrow sand pit along the lagoon was Namur, covering about 800 by 900 yards of dense forest that hid barracks and other structures. About 35 aircraft and roughly 2,000 Japanese servicemen, part of Vice Admiral Matsuji Iwamura's 24th Air Flotilla, occupied the islands, alongside 345 men of the 61st Guard Force and about 1,200 additional personnel. For defense, Roy Namur had 2 batteries of twin-mounted 127mm guns, 4 37mm cannons, 19 132mm heavy machine guns, and 10 20mm anti-aircraft guns, nearly all facing north toward an expected seaborne assault. There were 8 blockhouses, 52 pillboxes, general-purpose machine guns, anti-tank ditches, and fighting trenches surrounding the beaches. After 2 months of bombing, Rear Admiral Richard Connolly's Task Force 53 approached on January 29, 1944, starting a heavy 3-day bombardment that dropped over 2,655 tons of explosives. The Navy remembered its insufficient preparatory bombardment at Tarawa in November 1943, which had cost the Marines 3,178 casualties, and was determined to leave nothing standing this time. On January 31st, the 25th Marines quickly secured 5 nearby islands, allowing the 14th Marines to position their howitzers for the main invasion the next day. Throughout the night, Navy gunners bombarded the islands, pausing only briefly before dawn on February 1st so that the Marine-carrying landing ships could move into the lagoon. Once these were in place, the shelling resumed with even greater intensity. In the lagoon, the Marines readied themselves. Colonel Louis Jones's 23rd Marines were tasked with taking Roy, with Lieutenant Colonel Hansel Hammond's 1st Battalion landing on Red Beach 2 and Lieutenant Colonel Edward Dillon's 2nd Battalion attacking Red Beach 3. To their right, Colonel Franklin Hart's 24th Marines would assault Namur. Lieutenant Colonel Austin Brunelli's 3rd Battalion was assigned to Green Beach 1, and Lieutenant Colonel Francis Brink's 2nd Battalion was assigned to Green Beach 2 on either side of the L-shaped Yokohama Pier that divided their sector. The scheduled assault time, or W hour, was set for 10 a.m. The infantry was divided into boat teams made of riflemen, and assault teams combining demolition specialists, bazooka men, and machine gunners. They would embark in LVT-2 amphibious tractors fitted with tracks designed for climbing over coral reefs. Each LVT could carry 18 to 24 men. 4 companies of armored LVTA tanks with 37mm cannons and machine guns would lead the way, followed by infantry in flat-bottomed LCVPS. The 4th Amphibian Tractor Battalion would carry the 23rd Marines, while the 10th Battalion would carry the 24th. However, the 10th Battalion was badly worn out after supporting operations the day before, ferrying the 25th Marines to the nearby islands. Many of their LVTs had run out of fuel, and others had swamped or sought refuge on beaches during the night. By the morning of the main assault, only 62 of the original 110 LVTs assigned for Namur were still operational. As late as 6:30 a.m., Company G of Captain Charles Berkeley, Jr., meant to be part of Brink's assault wave, didn't have enough LVTs. Captain John Ross Jr.'s Company E, initially in reserve, swapped roles with Company G at the last minute. Similar shortages plagued Landing Team 3, but Lieutenant Colonel Brunelli combined all available LVTs to form a working assault wave. Company L, meant as the reserve, remained stranded aboard its landing ship without enough vehicles. Chaos replaced order at the line of departure, and W hour had to be delayed until 11 a.m. Meanwhile, the Navy stuck to its fire schedule. At 6:50 a.m., Rear Admiral Howard Kingman's Fire Support Unit 1 moved to within 3,000 yards of Namur's ocean beaches to start the final bombardment, while Rear Admiral Lawrence Dubos's Fire Support Unit 2 blasted Roy. The 14th Marines howitzers also joined in from nearby islands. By that time, the entire Japanese air fleet and command structure, including Admiral Iwamura and his staff, had been destroyed. Meanwhile, naval control officers trying to organize the assault waves were in a state of confusion, with unscheduled units showing up and assigned teams missing. The situation grew worse as minutes passed, and fuel consumption of idling LVTs threatened to cripple the operation. Fortunately, the floating reserve, Lieutenant Colonel Aquila's 1st Battalion, was embarked in LCVP's 3,000 yards behind the departure line. Colonel Hart ordered Companies A and B forward to fill gaps. But just as they arrived, remnants of Company G finally appeared, desperate to reclaim their position. Officers scrambled to reorganize, and just then, the signal to launch the invasion was given at 11:12 a.m. The 23rd Marines landing craft surged toward their assigned beaches. The 24th Marines' disorganized groups also started toward the enemy shore 4,000 yards away. LCY gunboats led the way, blasting rockets and 40-millimeter gunfire ahead of the armored LVTAs carrying the infantry. About 1,000 yards from shore, the gunboats turned broadside and fired directly at the beaches, while the Navy's heavy guns shifted fire inland and dive bombers made their final attack runs. The 30 armored LVTAS of the 23rd Marines hit the beach first, sending streams of tracers through the smoke-filled air. Almost immediately, the LVTAS were blocked by a large anti-tank ditch about 60 feet from the waterline and had to stop, firing their machine guns and cannons at anything they could see. At 11:33 a.m., within 20 minutes of the LVTA's landing, the infantry-loaded LVTs carrying the 23rd Marines also came ashore. On the right flank, Companies E and F of Lieutenant Colonel Dillon's 2nd Battalion landed on Red Beach 3, scrambled over a slight rise, and plunged into the smoke and dust beyond. Although gunfire flashed overhead, little of it was directed at them. The Navy's heavy bombardment had smashed almost all Japanese defenses. Dillon's Marines quickly crossed the anti-tank ditch, shot the few surviving Japanese defenders, and pushed inland. The Sherman tanks of Company C, 4th Tank Battalion, landed next, followed by light tanks from Company A. After crossing a damaged section of the ditch, the tanks joined the attack. Within 20 minutes, the Marines had reached their first objective, a line about 200 yards inland along the southern edge of the airfield. Company G landed soon after and began mopping up any remaining defenders. On the far left, Lieutenant Colonel Hammond's 1st Battalion landed on Red Beach, about 5 minutes after Dillon's men. They met little resistance. Captain James Scales's company. A peeled off to assault 2 large pillboxes at Wendy Point, 300 yards away, but found only smoking ruins and cratered ground. The Navy's firepower had obliterated the expected defenses. Wendy Point, believed to be a formidable stronghold, was secured without a fight. Scales's men then sprinted up the western shore to reach their part of the 0-1 line. Sporadic gunfire soon erupted from a large blockhouse called Buster, about 400 yards farther up the coast. But this too was quickly silenced after Marines crept close enough to throw grenades into the entrance, while other Marines were securing Wendy Point. Captain William Weinstein's Company B moved easily inland to join Dillon's men along the crater-pitted runway, where resistance was weak at best. Live Japanese soldiers were rare. Sometimes Bangalore torpedoes or satchel charges were needed to eliminate a few stubborn riflemen who were sniping from nearby trenches and debris-covered culverts. But by 1 p.m., all elements were in position and ready to move forward. By then, Colonel Jones had landed and set up his regimental command post near the beach, excited by how smoothly things were going. He radioed General Schmidt aboard the amphibious support ship USS Appalachian, saying, "This is a pip." A few minutes later, he added, "Give us the word, and we'll take the rest of the island." General Schmidt advised Jones to calm down and prepare for the second phase of the attack. Captain Robert Neiman, commander of Company C 4th Tank Battalion, had no intention of waiting. His M4 medium tanks sat idle and exposed on the flat open terrain, making them tempting targets for the many anti-tank guns reported to be in the area, favoring action over hesitation. Neiman ordered his tanks to advance. They blasted every suspicious structure with their 75mm guns, while bow gunners shot down Japanese soldiers who scurried like frightened rabbits in front of the heavy tanks. Seeing the tanks moving across the plain, the Marines of Company A moved out to provide protection, while a platoon of tanks advanced up the western coast by 1:30 p.m. Several M4s were engaging enemy machine gunners defending the northeastern runway area known as Nat Circle, while others patrolled the northern airstrip. It seemed victory was close. However, General Schmidt was not happy with this unauthorized action and ordered Jones to recall the tanks before they got caught in the scheduled bombardment for the next phase. It took nearly an hour to bring the tanks back under control and restore order. Phase 2 was set to begin at 3:15 p.m., with each assault battalion moving up its half of the island at 3:10 p.m. The cruiser Santa Fe began firing 5-inch shells into Nat Circle. 20 minutes later, the 2nd Battalion launched its attack, supported by a 75mm half-track firing from mid-island. Although some 20mm fire sputtered from Nat Circle, resistance was weak, with Marines finding more dead than living Japanese within 7 minutes. Captain John Patty's Company F was clearing out skeletal hangars along the northern runway, while Captain Neiman's tanks re-engaged enemy forces defending Nat Circle. Captain Carl Grendorf's Company E advanced alongside Patty's men. While moving forward, Grendorf's Marines fell into a shell hole, believing that enemy soldiers occupied a nearby trench, unwilling to take chances. PFC Richard Anderson had just pulled the pin on a grenade when it slipped from his hand and rolled to the bottom of the crater. Realizing the danger, Anderson threw himself on the grenade, saving his comrades. He was later awarded the Medal of Honor, posthumously. At first, Hammond's 1st Battalion remained in place to provide support for Dillon's men and did not advance until 4 p.m. Led by a platoon of light tanks, Captain Fred Eberhardt's Fresh Company C charged up the western shoreline, trailed by 3 75mm half-track guns. Mutilated Japanese bodies littered the area. A grim reminder of the fierce naval bombardment resistance came in the form of scattered rifle and machine gun fire. But in less than an hour, Eberhardt's men were mopping up Norbert Circle at the island's northwestern corner. Now only Nat Circle remained. Although Captain Neiman's tanks had taken out several enemy positions, one stubborn pillbox kept firing in 3 directions. Colonel Dillon ordered his reserve captain Frank Snipes' Company G to destroy it. While a half-track battered its steel door with 75mm shells, a demolition team closed in when they noticed a hole in the roof. A Marine climbed up and jammed a Bangalore torpedo into the opening, while others set shaped charges before the dust settled. A half-dozen Marines stormed inside, finding 3 machine guns and 3 dead gunners. They also noted that many of the defenses faced only northeast and west, making their lagoon approach easier by 4:45 p.m. All major resistance on Roy had ended, although mopping up was still underway. Colonel Jones declared the island secure at 6:20 p.m. The battle for Roy had been a quick victory. Namur would prove much harder about 1,000 yards from Namur's beaches. The assault waves of the 24th Marines moved past rocket-firing LCIs, heading toward the chaos. Nearly 3 dozen cannon-armed Amtraks from Companies B and D, 1st Armored Amphibian Battalion, led the way, ordered to move 100 yards inland after landing. But for unknown reasons, the entire wave stopped 50 yards short of the shore where landing craft continued to fire. Minutes later, the infantry's Amtraks pushed past the hesitant tanks under enemy fire. Second Lieutenant John Chapin of Company K looked over the bow of his vehicle for his landing site on Green Beach 1, but could see only smoke and dust. He turned to speak to his platoon surgeon, only to find him dead, his skull shattered. Shocked, Chapin refocused several hundred yards to his right. The amphibious tractors of the 2nd Battalion climbed onto Green Beach 2 a bit before noon, while Chapin's own battalion hit Green Beach 1 shortly after, all landed with machine guns blazing. The plan was to push 100 yards inland, but as on Roy, a deep anti-tank ditch forced them to stop. Abruptly, officers shouted, "Let's go," and vaulted the dune walls covering fire, intensified as heavily burdened Marines jumped 7 feet onto the beach below and crawled forward to the ditch on Green Beach 1. Intermittent machine gun fire scattered boat teams as Captain Albert Arsenault's company the Frassen and Captain Doyle Stout's company K disembarked. Lying in the sand, Chapin asked his platoon guide about the men's positions, but before he could answer, a sniper shot off the guide's hand. Panicked, the wounded man shouted for a sailor, meaning a corpsman, knowing snipers often targeted medics within minutes. Chapin had lost 2 key subordinates and wondered if Namur would turn into another Tarawa on Green Beach 2. Elements of both assault companies also became mixed during the landing. But fortunately, resistance there was light. Occasionally, a Japanese soldier would leap from a trench fire, a few shots, then vanish. Marines responded with grenades and charges only. On the far right was their serious opposition, where erratic machine gun fire hit Company F from a pillbox above Sally Point. But this was quickly silenced with help from heavy weapons on nearby Igaret Island. The boat and assault teams cleared both beaches quickly and moved inland, but faced unexpected problems. Unlike the open fields of Roy, Namur was thick with foliage and storm debris from the naval bombardment. Palm fronds, splintered trunks, and wreckage concealed enemy bunkers and pillboxes, forcing the Marines to advance carefully. Sometimes a lone defender would charge from cover in a suicide attack, but was quickly gunned down elsewhere. Stubborn pillboxes needed demolition teams, while lesser threats were left for follow-up troops within 15 minutes. Many teams had pushed 200 yards inland, but on the left flank of Brink's 2nd Battalion contact was lost with Brell's 3rd Battalion. This happened after elements of Company E landed behind Company F on Green Beach 2. Getting tangled in the vegetation and ending up on the wrong side of the battalion's formation, creating a dangerous gap. Half of Captain Burley's Company G had landed and was sent to fill the gap, but they encountered growing resistance from isolated machine guns and riflemen and made little progress, only reaching about 175 yards inland. They did find a lost team from Company E, but could not re-establish contact with the main force. Captain Berkeley's men were not alone in facing trouble in the 3rd Battalion sector. An assault team led by Chapin joined Lieutenant John Power's team before a strong point built from sand-filled oil drums. Every attempt to bypass it was stopped by heavy fire. Chapin and Power hid behind a concrete wall 25 feet away to plan under covering fire. Power led 2 automatic riflemen to the rear, while Chapin and another Marine carrying a Bangalore torpedo approached the front entrance. Chapin tossed a grenade inside, allowing his partner to jam the torpedo into place. They rolled away as the entrance collapsed in a cloud of smoke and dust. Mission accomplished. They quickly regrouped with Power, who had found a shaped charge. This time, Power led the assault. With the 2nd Battalion still reeling from the bunker disaster, Captain Irvin Steer's company A took over operations on the far right flank, while Captain Horace Park's newly arrived Company C moved up to relieve the shaken Company E. At the same time, Captain Houston Stiff's Company L, which had finally secured enough boats for a landing, moved up to 3rd Battalion to relieve Company B from its mopping-up duties, enabling that unit to replace the battle-weary Company K. Company K was then sent to Poling Point, the finger-like sandbar jutting between Roe and Namur, to provide flanking fire for the upcoming attack alongside the regiment's heavier weapons. Now reorganized, the front stretched from left to right with Company W anchoring the western shore. Company B held a position near the junction of Sycamore Boulevard and Needham Lane, while Company L remained in reserve in the center. Half of 2nd Battalion's Company G carried the line east along Sycamore Boulevard, with Companies F, C, and A extending the front toward 9 Point. Remnants of Company E stayed on line, unaware they had been relieved. As the hour of attack drew closer, several light tanks and amphibious vehicles rumbled forward, pumping 37mm shells into 3 troublesome blockhouses that had harassed the infantry along Sycamore Boulevard. While the blockhouses at New Band Lane and the road junction were neutralized, the guns were too weak to penetrate the thick concrete of the Nut Lane bunker, which remained a thorn in the battalion's side for the rest of the day. At precisely 4:30 p.m., Brunelli's 3rd Battalion launched its attack, but was stunned by the ferocity of the Japanese resistance. Pockets of defenders, lacking coordination, still fought with desperate tenacity. Machine guns and sniper fire picked off Marines as they dashed forward under bursting mortar shells. Dense terrain masked enemy strong points, slowing the advance, especially on the left flank. At one point, Corporal Alex Hallich's squad from Company B was pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. Though already twice wounded, Halleck told his men to stay put while he scouted the gun's location. Alone in enemy territory, he stormed the machine gun nest and killed its crew, allowing his squad to move forward. He later received the Navy Cross for his bravery. On the right, confusion during reorganization delayed 2nd Battalion's attack for another hour. Supported by light tanks from Company B, 4th Tank Battalion, the infantry crossed Sycamore Boulevard and pushed into a jungle crackling with small arms fire. Forced to clear every ruined building and pile of debris, they soon lost contact with the tanks, which pressed forward, covering one another with machine gun and canister fire. Within 20 minutes, they reached Narcissus Street, 300 yards beyond the line of departure. Several tanks pivoted right, advancing down a road cutting southeast toward the junction with Sycamore Boulevard. After dodging one obstacle, Captain James Denig's command tank became isolated. Denig stopped in a clearing to get his bearings when 5 Japanese soldiers burst from the underbrush and swarmed his tank. One dropped a grenade through an open signal port, wounding the entire crew and setting the compartment on fire. At that critical moment, Private First Class Howard Smith of Company A broke through the brush and sprayed the tank with his bar, killing 4 assailants while a buddy shot the 5th. Climbing aboard the burning tank, Smith pulled the mortally wounded Denig out, returned to rescue 2 more crew members, but was unable to save the driver. Smith's heroism earned him a Navy Cross. Meanwhile, Captain Garson's decimated Company F broke through the center and reached Narcissus Lane, only 35 yards from the northern beach. Lacking proper support, Garson was ordered back 100 yards, where his men held a vulnerable salient. Things were even more desperate on the far right, where elements of Company A pushed out to the eastern coast near Nadine Point. Leading the way was Corporal Arthur Irvin, a former Marine raider known for his fierce tobacco chewing. Irvin charged ahead of the scouts, tossing grenades and firing relentlessly at any Japanese soldier he saw. When the company encountered the formidable blockhouse at Nut Lane, Irvin led the assault. First Lieutenant Roy Wood's platoon was close behind Irvin when heavy gunfire forced them to the ground. Lieutenant Phil Wood and machine gunners George Smith and Steve Hopkins, son of presidential advisor Harry Hopkins, tumbled into a trench and set up their Browning machine gun. Smith immediately went to work, while Wood and Hopkins moved further down the trench. They passed a Japanese corpse that suddenly sprang to life, pulling a grenade. Hopkins, startled and with his rifle nearly touching the soldier's skull, fired, but the Japanese soldier merely shook his head before Hopkins emptied his entire clip into him. Mortar shells soon rained down on them, but Irvin remained fearless, vaulting the parapet to scout the Nut Lane blockhouse, killing 2 enemy gunners while enemy bullets tore the helmet from his head. Upon returning, Irvin reported back. Lieutenant Phil Wood decided to use the platoon's 60mm mortars, but before they could set up, bazooka rounds slammed into the bunker and Marines rushed forward. Irvin and Lieutenant Harry Reynolds threw grenades through the embrasure, but gunfire from a nearby dugout wounded Irvin. Reynolds, Roy Wood, and Phil Wood grabbed a few men and charged the dugout, hurling grenades and firing rifles. Sergeant Frank Tucker and Corporal Franklin Robbins rushed inside, killing every enemy soldier they found. The Nut Lane bunker resumed firing. Hoping to outflank it, a dozen Marines crossed Sycamore Boulevard, but were met by heavy fire from beach entrenchments. Isolated, the squad led by Lieutenants Roy Wood and Reynolds took matters into their own hands. Platoon Sergeant James Adams charged and gunned down a machine gun crew before he was killed by enemy fire. Corporal Robbins fought fiercely before falling as well. Reynolds continued fighting despite a leg wound, while Tucker stood upright behind a shattered tree trunk, firing steadily at Japanese soldiers only 15 yards away. Return fire ripped bark from Tucker's shelter, pierced his helmet, and drained his canteen. But he kept shooting. Other Marines, seeing his position, tossed him grenades, which he hurled into enemy trenches until they were all spent. As bullets tore into the trees around him, Tucker called for covering fire. Privates Lawrence Knight and Lester Cate fired their bars furiously. As Tucker escaped, Knight was wounded but kept shooting until ordered to seek aid. With the enemy in disarray, the Marines closed in, killing at least 30 Japanese soldiers as they fled toward another pillbox. By then, dusk had fallen, and the Marines, still separated from their comrades, dug in for the night. Colonel Hart chose to halt the offensive and dig in, hoping to secure the island the following morning. Some veteran Marines thought this was a mistake, knowing the dangers of Japanese night infiltration and banzai attacks. Nevertheless, they obeyed orders and began digging. Darkness fell and star shells illuminated the battlefield, a grim landscape strewn with corpses, shredded foliage, and battered enemy structures. Throughout the night, gunfire erupted from every direction as infiltrators tested the lines. Marines answered with streams of tracer fire. Some Japanese soldiers and Marines died in close encounters. Among the casualties was young Steve Hopkins, mortally wounded while pulling flank security near Nadine Point. Just before dawn, the rustling in front of 3rd Battalion grew into a swelling thrash, and then came the cry of "Banzai!" Japanese soldiers burst from the underbrush in groups, yelling madly and charging with rifles, bayonets, and swords. The Marines unleashed a furious storm of fire. A gap between Companies I and B was exploited, and savage hand-to-hand fighting broke out. Only the timely arrival of Company L and a few medium tanks prevented disaster. Now reinforced, the Marines counterattacked. In the middle of the melee, 6 Marines huddled in a shell hole when a grenade landed among them. Private Richard Sorensen threw himself on it just before it exploded, saving his comrades at the cost of grievous wounds. Nearby, Corpsman James Kirby treated Sorensen after hearing his cries. Despite his injuries, Sorensen survived to receive the Medal of Honor. The entire brutal battle was over within 35 minutes.